beers. Feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have a comment or question as I go through the slides. So I guess the first question is like, why do I like smoked beers, and like, why would anyone like smoked beers? And for me, it was these ones here that really did it for me. The Alaskan smoked porter, I think, was the first one that I ever had, and I was at this like really cozy bar after going skiing in this resort in Idaho, and it was just like a really good experience. And I really liked the beer. And the same goes, a similar experience with the Ex-Schlenkerla Märzen Rauch beer, and to a lesser extent with this Stone smoked porter. They're all just like really good beers, and you know, the smoke just like enhances the flavor of the base beer, and it comes off as like really rustic and just like a great flavor. So it's like a combination of, you know, the flavor combination and just the experience of drinking them that did it for me. And I guess I didn't add a slide about like why I'm qualified to talk about this, but I guess it's because, you know, I've brewed a lot of smoked beers and, you know, did well in competition with some of them at least. So I guess I have some experience.
Well, you got it last year at least, right? I don't know about all your other previous ones, but you got, was it gold at the Boston NHC first round for your smoked Helles, and then you got to best of table at the second round?
Yeah, I did, and I entered those the smoked Helles and the Rauch beer that I brewed. Like I brewed each of those like 5 or 6 times last year and entered them into a bunch of competitions and did pretty well at them. So, I mean, that's not to say that all of my smoked beers are good, but you know, I seem to be able to do well with those two at least.
Do you smoke cigars, cigarettes, or do you love campfires?
No, so I don't smoke, you know, cigars or tobacco or anything.
Also, you didn't highlight.
So
you're vegetarian, so that's.
Yeah, I don't eat like smoked, you know, ham or bacon or whatever. But I do like the smell of campfires and like smoked cheese, like smoked Gouda. I really like. So those things, you know, they all have a similar smoke character, just not the meats for me. Don't like those. Let's see. Whoops, no. How do I go back to PowerPoint here? Okay, background. So a lot of this is taken from the Smoked Beers book from Brewers Publications, which is a really great resource for all the history and such around smoked beers. But apparently, like the malts in most beers used to be dried over an open fire that produced smoke. So a lot of beers, you know, in the past had a smoke character to some extent or another, but I don't think it was like often appreciated or a desired characteristic in the beer, so they tried to minimize it. But eventually they invented, you know, the technology that could dry the malts out without giving them a smoked character. And that at that point, you know, smoke is like not a feature in most beers, and it remains instead of like specialty beer. They should say Bamberg, but Bamberg, Germany. It's like this town in Bavaria where the breweries there kind of specialize in smoked beers, and they're supposed to be really awesome, and a lot of really good smoked beers there. The Ex-Schlenkerla and the Spezial breweries are the big ones, but I think there's a few more that kind of specialize in smoked beers in Bamberg. I've never been there, but it's supposed to be really cool. So the smoky BJCP styles are listed here. The Rauch beer, I've brewed a lot of that. That's like a smoky Märzen, and it has to use a particular kind of smoke malt, beechwood smoke. And then these other two, the Lichtenheiner, it's like a smoky Berliner, and I think Dirks has brewed one. He won NHC with a Lichtenheiner
BHC,
a few years ago, I think. Yeah, BHC, excuse me.
I have one right now. I'll have to get to you, but nice. it has the smoked Merita peppers in them. But yeah, so it's got some heat too. So it's a little, you know, it wouldn't qualify for that one, but it's close.
Yeah, but that would fit into like specialty smoke or classic style smoke, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I'd say specialty because it's not just a Berliner. It also has the peppers, so it's not a classic style. And then you throw on there the smoke. I'd say B32B, Dougie.
Yeah.
Yeah. If there were any competitions happening, that would be the right category to enter it in.
I mean, you could, I guess, spice beer is the classic style, and then it's smoked.
Anyway, so there are these two historical styles that I've never brewed, but I think Dirk's did a Lichtenhunter, and I don't know if anyone in the club has done the Pivo Grodzicki before.
I've tasted one.
Didn't Notch do one?
Oh, good question. I don't know if they did. I did one down. There's if you're ever in Austin, Ramsay, there's a place right outside the Austin airport called Live Oak, and they had about 4 or 5 smoked beers on tap, including a Pivo Grodzicki. They're all really, really effing good. Keck's been there. He let me onto the place, and it's solid.
Live Oak. Yeah, I'll have to check it out. Although there's so many places and breweries to check out, but anyway. So the other one that, besides the Rauch beer, like the 32A, I think is the other one that, a lot of people brew or enter in competitions. It's just like a classic style and smoke it. So as far as my experience goes, I've done, smoked Helles, like I mentioned. I've done a Rauchbach. I've done smoked porters a few times. I've also done a smoked mild once. And my latest one was kind of a smoky wheat beer, which didn't turn out so well. But, the possibilities are endless, I guess.
Are there some styles that you think the smoke really works well with, and styles that you think, no, it really just doesn't work?
Yeah, so I was going to get to that in some of the later slides.
That's fine. I can wait.
Okay, cool. All right, so here's just a list of places that you can get the smoked malts, and how they're produced is just sort of like the traditional way of making malt, right? Like they take the malt and then they dry it over a fire that produces heat, that produces smoke, and the smoke gets into the malt and imparts the smoky flavor. I got this list just by Googling, and there may be some others as well, but each of the different smokes or sources of smoke and wood imparts a different flavor, and like a different level of intensity and so forth. I've brewed mostly with a beechwood smoked, which is like the traditional German smoked. If you want to brew a Rauch beer 6B, you have to use the beechwood because other types of wood are considered inappropriate. Although I don't know if the judges can really taste the difference, if they can, how much difference they can really taste. But you can use any of the other types of wood in the classic style smoked beer. You're just supposed to specify what type of wood you're using so that the judges know that. I guess some people have used peat smoked malt, and that's I've never used it, but apparently it doesn't generally work well in beer, except maybe in very small quantities, because it's really strong and can be really acrid. And even in Scottish style beers, I don't think it's considered quite appropriate, although I think a lot of American interpretations do use just a tiny bit of it. So just be careful with peat malt if you use it. You can also use your own home smoked malt. I've never done it, but there's YouTube videos and stuff about how to do it, and you can use any type of wood you want and any level of intensity. There's detailed instructions about it in the smoked beers book. But if you do it, you should be really careful to follow the directions, because if not, if you smoke it at too hot a temperature, you can get some nasty carcinogens into the malt, and you can destroy the diastatic power of the malt as well. So you just want to be careful with that.
So Ramsay, so all these malts are treated as base malts, right? So if you were subbing out if you had a recipe that was, I don't know, whatever, a 10 ounce 2-row, and you wanted to add applewood smoked malt, you would pull back the 2-row. It wouldn't be a specialty malt, correct?
Yeah, so that's right. So when I brew like the smoked Helles, for example, it's like a normal Helles recipe, except some of the Pilsner is subbed out for smoked malt. And the same goes with like the other beers that I brewed. And I think, we'll talk about the percentages, but usually it goes from like 20% of your malt bill up to 100%. So there's another slide about that, but it has, or at least the commercially smoked malts, as far as I know, they have the full diastatic power. They're a little bit more acidic than non-smoked malts, and they're generally like pale ale or light Munich style malt. Although it's kind of hard to find out. The Weyermann and the Best Malts ones, they don't exactly say like what the base malt style is, but I'm pretty sure it's light Munich.
How do you account for that in your pH calculation?
I think it's like a pretty minute effect, but it's just a little more acidic. It's not going to give it the same tang as like acid malt or anything like that, but it's slightly more acidic than base malt. I don't really like account for it when I do my Rauch beers. I just sort of brew. What I do is just take my water and add a bit of phosphoric acid to the mash. And that goes even when I do the really smoky ones like the Rauch Bock or the Rauch beer, which have like 60% smoked malt.
Is there a standardized measuring device for the amount of smoke inside a particular malt or beer, for that matter?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it goes by taste. These things vary by by maltster and wood in intensity, and I've never seen anything like some kind of quantified intensity of smoke on the web pages for these malts. They have some like qualitative characterizations on them, like they'll say that it's kind of like sweet and mellow, or they'll say that it's assertively smoky or whatever, but I've never seen like a standardized metric for it. So by the way, along those lines, they say that the beechwood is kind of the most intensely smoky one. The apple, cherry, and the sweet cherry, and the pear, and these other malts are like considered a little less intensely smoky and a little sweeter. Although I would say the mesquite smoked malt is pretty intense with like a barbecue kind of character. I tasted some of that at the NHC last year, and it was quite like barbecue-y. But I've never brewed it. Some people can use like liquid smoke, which is it's like some kind of concentrate. Apparently, it doesn't really go well with beer, so I would try to avoid it. So in terms of brewing with them, you can use up to 100% smoke in your grain.
Excuse me. I was muted, so I didn't jump in. On the liquid smoke, a few years back, we tried a BJCP where we tried a bunch of different ones, and I brought some liquid smoke. That's hickory smoke, and pretty much everybody agreed hickory did not go well with beer. It was an interesting experiment, but you didn't want to do more than the experiment.
What did they say about the flavor of hickory?
Well, it just clashed. Hickory is great for meat, for your barbecue pork, that kind of thing, but or like a bean soup kind of thing. But for beer, it just didn't work.
It could have been the smoke part of it too, like using the liquid. The liquid part of it.
Oh, my experience using
were any of the liquid smokes good with beer? I don't think I was at that meeting.
I don't recall that we had other ones available. That's the one you can easily get in a store if you go in your supermarket.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like usually like, if you're cooking like an entire like pork butt, you put like, 3 splashes of liquid smoke on it. So getting enough out for, a pitcher of beer even would be pretty difficult.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing it in
apply your homeopathic technique.
But I don't recall there being other, at least from my cooking experience, I don't recall other liquid smokes available other than the Hickory liquid smoke.
There's some other ones, just like side brands, like I've seen Applewood, and let's just don't use fucking liquid smoke in beer.
Or meats.
I do
You
recommend it
use
for
it
the
on
navy
meat,
bean
Doug?
soup.
I just heard it's usually just not as good as regular smoke.
Navy bean soup. There, you use it there, and it's definitely good. Anyway, thank you, Ramsay.
Sure. Anyway, actually, this reminds me, another thing not to do is to use sappy or resinous wood. Apparently, it doesn't work well either. It gives a really resinous kind of like bad taste in beer. So like pine, various kinds of pine, I think aren't good for smoking food or beer. Okay, so brewing with them. So you can use up to 100% of your malt bill with smoked malt if you want, assuming that you're using a malt that has diastatic power, which most of the commercial ones or all of them do. And you know, depending on how much smoke you use in your beer, you'll get varying degrees of smoke, but it also varies with the age of the beer and the malt and the base style, and it competes with other qualities in the beer, right? So it's just like everything. You can't take the maltiness and the smokiness up to 11. They kind of like they can be balanced, but you can't have both like extremely strong. I also think that your palate might have a saturation point for smoke, just like it does for bitterness. And that as you taste smoked beers one after the other, like your perception of the smoke will change, right? So you'll become less sensitive to it as you drink more smoky beers, just like as you drink more IPAs in the same session. And it's an interesting experiment. If you take a really hoppy IPA, if you're drinking that for a bit, and then you go drink a smoked beer, or the other way around, like it'll just the two flavors are so different that they'll kind of like when you switch, you'll just like see how much different they really are, and it'll like recharge your palate for tasting the smoke. So for me, when I do these smoked beers, the goal is to have a beer that has a smoky note. It's not to like have a smoke bomb that just tastes like pure smoke, right? So you want the smoky character and the character of the beer both to come through a bit. And when you're brewing a beer that doesn't have a huge amount of flavor or is very highly alcoholic, like the mild or the wheat beer or Irish stout, for example, which are like, they're tasty, but they're not like super strong in taste. You want to use a lower percentage of your malt bill as smoked malt to avoid overpowering the base beer. So I think for me, that's like 15 to 40%, depending on how much smoke you like and how sensitive you are. You can take that down a notch. But my smoked Helles was using about 35% Rauch malt, and when I did a mild with it, it was like 25%.
Hey, Ray,
that mild was pretty smoky.
When you were doing like the mild and the Irish stout, did you have to play around with a little bit of the dark malts, because they're going to provide some of that, they're going to kind of screw with the acidity, and then kind of you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. So that's definitely on the next slide. To watch the interaction between the dark malts and the smoke malt, because at least the Beechwood smoke, like it's kind of dry, right? Like it dries out the beer, and it can be a little bit acrid. So you just want to tone down your use of smoke malts to avoid like overdoing that quality. So especially if you're doing a mild or something like that, I think you should tone down your use of the dark malts when you're using smoke, just to avoid like overdoing it. But of course, like the chocolate and roasty character can go really well with the smoke, because they can kind of complement each other. You just have to be careful not to overdo it. so back to this slide for a minute. So if you're going to do like a Rauch beer or a porter or a Bock beer with the smoke, you can boost the smoke malt up to come through the stronger flavors of those beers. So for me, it's like 40% or up. The Rauch beer and Rauch Bock that I've been brewing are about 60%. And apparently, Schlenkerla's Rauch Bock is like almost 100% smoke malt with a little bit of color malt. And that's like very smoky. For me, it's almost like bordering on the ashy side. So be careful with it.
Have you ever tried it in the other direction? I know when I'm cooking, sometimes I put a small amount of a spice in, so you really can't identify it when you're eating the food, but you say there's something interesting here. Have you ever tried going low?
Yeah, so that's one thing that I want to do with wheat beer. I have never brewed a smoky wheat beer, but well, no, that's not true. I tried a smoky wheat beer, and I think I overdid it on the smoke. So in that case, there's a couple of things going on there that I think didn't turn out well. Is that like the smoke is kind of phenolic, and the wheat beer yeast also produces some phenols. And so I think what happened is that they kind of came together and like overdid it on the phenol. So it had kind of this, yeah, for me, it didn't work. It was just a little overly phenolic. But also like too smoky, and the weediness didn't come through quite right. So yeah, I think if, you can just add a little bit of complexity with a bit of smoke in the background. Although I haven't really gone in that direction. I've been full on with a lot of smoke. So experiment with the subtle smokiness.
Has anybody on the call? I think Matt did this for his Lichten beer, but has anybody on the call smoked their own malts?
Craig has a smoker at Backbeat Brewing right now, and he's going to do some there. So I like the fact that Ramsay mentioned something about keeping it under a certain temperature, otherwise you're going to screw up the whole batch. So he's looking to do that. So yeah, I guess maybe I'll send Ramsay a quick email to send me like what definitely not to do if they do it. So
there's detailed instructions in the smoke beer book, and as I recall, you have to make sure that the temperature of the smoke doesn't get above about 120 degrees, or you're going to get some nasty stuff in there.
Okay. Yeah, he's got a fan so he can regulate it, keep it under a certain temp. So yeah, Pete's excited to try it out. So, it'll be going down pretty soon.
Cool. Well, I'd love to try the beer.
Right on, right on.
Okay. So things to avoid or watch out for. You don't want the beer to come off like greasy, overly phenolic, or like cigarette or smoky, or like ash, or really acrid. If that happens, you're doing something wrong. You might be using too much smoke beer or too much dark malt at the same time. Or your attenuation might be too high, and you're not getting the sweetness to kind of balance things out a bit. Yeah, and even if you avoid that, you shouldn't overwhelm the character of the base beer with smoke. You want some kind of like complexity in the smoke to really complement the base beer and not to overwhelm it. Don't use chlorinated water, because the chlorine in the smoke malt can interact to create nasty polyphenols. We talked a little bit about the interaction between smoke malt and dark malts. I haven't experimented too much with smoke malt and really hoppy beers, or really different kinds of yeast besides clean lager yeast for the most part. But I think, I'm sort of guessing, but I think that the smokiness would tend to go well with kind of, spicy German hops and clean lager yeast, because that's where, the Rauch beers, the classic styles, Rauch beers come from. I think also the smokiness can imparts a dryness that can substitute a little bit for the bitterness, right? Because we have bitterness in beer to sort of balance out the sweetness of unbittered malt or wort. So you might want to tone down the bitterness of your beers as well if you're going to smoke them.
Ramsay, you said that the smoke can bring out pininess. So wouldn't that go with IPA?
Yeah. So I was thinking about that you know, if you're going to do an IPA, which I've never done but probably should do, is like, yeah, the interaction with the hops and yeast. And I was thinking that, you know, the dankness of some of these hops would go really well with the smoke. But also I was thinking about if you're going to do a smoke IPA like a Hawaiian pizza kind of thing. So if you have one of these tropical fruit hops or pineapple-y hop, it could go well with some of the bacony character or hammy character of smoked malt. That's one thing I want to try, but there's a possibility that it may be a dumper. So that's definitely one thing I'd like to experiment with. We mentioned peat smoke and liquid smoke. Don't use those.
Ramsay, the chlorinated water, since you and I are both in Medford, and would you use like Campton tablets to get down any chlorines or chloramines from public water supply?
Yeah, so I use a little bit of Campton in almost all of my beers, just like half a tab in the mash. I think when I first started brewing these beers, I lived in Cleveland, which didn't have chlorinated water, and here in Medford, I don't think the water is really chlorinated here, is it, in Medford?
I think since MWRA uses UV and ozone, I think.
MWRA water has chloramines, but not
Chloramines, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Medford too, and so what all I do usually is I collect the water. I mean, I throw some Camden in, but I collect the water, you know, the day before and just let it sit out and degas. And I've never brewed a smoke beer, but just in general.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I've been using Medford water, you know, since I got here without ROing it or anything. So my smoke beers have turned out fine, generally speaking. So, I mean, Medford water is good, but if you do have a chlorinated water source, be really careful with dechlorinating it first before you use smoke beer. Yeah,
good call. One other point I wanted to make from one of your earlier slides, you mentioned that the Rausch beer should be all beechwood. A Rausch beer I submitted to some competition a couple of years ago ended up winning a medal, but it happened to not have beechwood smoked malt. It had like cherry smoked malt, cherrywood smoked malt. And that's clearly a case of it's really hard to distinguish between types of wood smoke and malt. So I think there's a tiny bit of a crapshoot there depending on the competition.
Yeah, I wonder if you had brewed it with the mesquite smoked malt that it would have been really apparent.
Yeah, good point.
But yeah, I mean, who knows how well judges can taste the difference? I don't know.
Do you have any kind of sense as to the shelf stability of the wort and or the beer with smoke? Increased or decreased?
So I think it says in the smoke beer book that the quality and intensity of the smoke can change over time, and I think that's definitely true. You know, in the finished beer, just like anything, it ages, and it changes the taste of it. And the grains too, like the smokiness of the grains, if you store them for a long time, will diminish. So it's just like anything, right? You know, you need to use good practice in terms of the freshness of your ingredients and drink the beer when it's in its prime. You know, when I do my smoked lagers, like I don't age them a really long time or anything. And when I have just let them age a long time, you know, it's like anything, they deteriorate over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just more or less curious about the fact that in the previous section, you had talked about different types of beers you can brew from using smoked malts. And in this particular case, if you were to do a 5-gallon batch, for example, of smoked smoked wort, I guess, can you save that and then just, dose a little bit of each of your other beers to get a sense of what you might get? So you were talking about the IPAs earlier. Mm-hmm. Can you, use some of that wort instead of having to do an entire batch? Even if it's a 2.5-gallon batch of smoked IPA.
I mean, I suppose you could use a pressure cooker to can some smoked wort and then dose small batches with it if you'd like. I think it's just like normal sanitation and safety and canning technique with any other thing, right? It's not going to change just because you're using smoked malt or smoked wort. I suppose there might be some chemical reason that smoke has a preservative quality. I mean, smoking meats and cheese and whatnot is like a way of preserving it, but the details of that I don't know if it's even a thing.
I'd be concerned about adding unfermented wort. Not concerned with any bad things, but to really get the sense of the beer, if you're at even like 10%, it's like tasting a smoked beer that's under attenuated. So I think you have to be careful there with the residual sweetness you're adding to it in addition to the smoke. But it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, and then I guess if you wanted to do a full batch after dosing it with smoked wort, like how do you know how much smoked malt to use if you do a full batch? I don't know, but it's certainly an interesting idea. Okay, so recipes and resources. I'd be happy to post some of these recipes on the Slack or the Worts email that I've brewed for any of these. The Smoked Beers book is a really good resource. There's like resources on the internet about the different qualities of different kinds of wood that you can use to smoke food and wort. And then you can go out and buy like these wood chips to smoke if you have a smoker, or you can use a normal grill with a smoke box, which is like you put the wood chips in a stainless steel box and then heat it up in your grill, and it like smokes the food inside. I've never done it, but I would like to do it at some point. Although I don't know how much smoked malt could fit in my like propane grill. I'd want to smoke at least 4 or 5 pounds at a time. So ideas and experiments for doing smoked beers. I haven't done all of these things, but I think they would be really interesting ideas if you want to go down this like rabbit hole of seeing how much stuff you can smoke and what you can do with it. I think it would be a cool club experiment to keep the base recipe, but vary the smoke or wood varieties for a bunch of different beers. Of course, you can blend the smoke and wood varieties for interesting effects. It would seem pretty natural to like make a smoked beer and age it on wood for a long time, because the smoke comes from wood, and you could get some interesting complementary flavors out of that process. Smoked sours and Brett beers, like they sound really weird, but when Dirks brewed these, the Lichtenheiner and he brewed also a smoked Flanders, both of which turned out really well, I thought. You can ask him about the recipes and such. We talked a little bit about a smoked IPA. I had one once in Germany that was okay. It was really interesting. And it's one thing that I'd kind of like to experiment with. Smoked Hefeweizen. So I kind of brewed one of these once, and I think it would be a good opportunity to use like just a little bit of smoke and keep it like in the background note for some added complexity. because if you use too much, I think with this phenolic yeast, you'll get overly phenolic beer with that if you use too much smoke. I've brewed also this Smoky Weizen Stout. I was brewing it for the BJCP group where I had like category 32B, which is like experimental smoky beer, and it turned out a little bit too phenolic and not stout-like enough because I used midnight wheat, which like doesn't impart that much roasty character. So I'll probably rebrew that again and see if I can make it better. And then I think like since smoky foods are associated with barbecuing, you could use some barbecue spices or like peppers. And I've seen things on the internet about people who smoke fruit like lemons and limes and peaches or nuts. Interesting thing to try out, see how it goes, see what kind of flavors you can get from that. So, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. Happy to answer more questions, but that's my deck.
Hey, Ramsay, so this is great. So I know, like with like, you know, like for rye example, like you can get like a base malt rye, and then they have like chocolate rye and crystal rye and all these different. Can you get, or have you seen people doing themselves like specialty malts that are smoked? So like take like a smoked crystal or a smoked chocolate, or with the smoke, do you think the smoke and the like the high, you know, roastiness of the malt might kind of play poorly on each other? And if I missed that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and like the basic answer is no. So, you know, when I was researching for this, I was trying to find out where you can get excuse me, smoked malt, and all of these are like base malts, right? They're like pale ale or Munich, or like you know, I think a few of them are Pilsner malts, but there are no like specialty malts that I saw in here. With maybe the exception of oak smoked wheat, which is required, I think, in a couple of these historical styles. But yeah, it's a really interesting question what a smoky crystal malt would be like.
I've seen smoked oak before, because I think smoked oak is or oak smoked malt, I should say, which I guess is just a different kind of smoke, is a traditional part of the Piwo Grodzki, but I could be thinking about that wrong. Yeah, I've never seen anything else besides that. So I've seen smoked oak before, but I think to your point, I've never seen anything that isn't like a base tech malt or, you know, like a smoked crystal or anything like that.
And by the way, on the oak smoked wheat malt, there was a guy at NHC last year who did a presentation about that, and you know, was handing out some of the samples of his beer, and one of them was 100% oak smoked wheat beer, which was really good. It was like a Bock or so with oak smoked wheat.
Did you say how
smokiness.
Do you say how that sparge went?
I think he uses a lot of rice hulls.
So I'm wondering if there's really a reason to have smoked crystal, because if you can get the smoke in the base malt, then why bother smoking the specialty malts at all?
Yeah, that's.
Well,
that seems right.
I've never brewed it, but my guess, Dave, is going back to your particular question earlier, right? Maybe you want just a bit of delicate smoke flavor to it, right? And that would, if you had specialty smoked malts, that's one way that you could control the amount of smoke you get in there, right?
But you could also do it with just how much of the smoked base malt you use. So, I mean, I've never tried either way. I don't know. It just seems like smoke is smoke. It doesn't matter which malt it comes in on. So why go to the trouble of smoking crystal if I can just get it in my base malt and control how smoky by how much of the smoked base malt I use. But I'm arguing about something I never tried, so it doesn't matter.
So Ramsay. Oh, second one.
Sure, I can hear you.
Oh yeah. So sorry. what did you do with your smoked Hefeweizen? Because I tried one once before, but it was probably like 10 years ago. So God knows how horrible it was. And I thought it was decent. And I had one that just sticks with me. Victory did one that just was like the perfect brunch beer because it had like that smokiness with it. So I really want to try it, but I'm curious what you did because I'm also concerned about the phenolic play. Can you walk us through like what your recipe was approach, where you think you went wrong?
So I don't think I have the recipe for the smoked wheat beer because I did it a really long time ago. But I do have one for the smoky Weizen stout, which was like mostly like a smoky wheat beer because the dark malts in that case just like didn't bring much character to it. And I think that was like 20 or 30% smoked malt. And then so what I did with that one too was I tried to ferment the yeast a little warmer than normally would because I was trying to avoid the clovey character and get more of the fruity banana character from it. So I thought that would play better with the smoke. Hold on.
Yeah, okay.
Ross, I can send you the recipe. Why don't I do that? I'll send you the recipe. But yeah, the idea was to get like some smokiness without too much clovey phenolicness, and then like a banana character. But
yeah, I'd love to try it. So if you don't mind sending it, because my thoughts were I was going to drop my ferulic acid rest completely because that really accentuates the phenols. And I had a similar thought on the maybe fermenting warmer. But yeah, I'd love to kind of look what you did and and maybe have one less iteration I need to do to try to get something, and maybe I won't be able to get it at all, but I just love the idea of a perfect breakfast beer, a little bit of smokiness to go with whatever gravy you have, sausage gravy. I know you're not a meat person, but for me, bacon and all the other good stuff, I don't know.
Sure, happy to post a recipe on the Slack.
Awesome. So what smoked malts have you used? I know, I've never gone away from Beechwood because it's traditional, and the little I've done has worked. I don't do a lot of smoked beers. So have you used anything besides Beechwood or have you just kind of stuck with what you know?
So mostly Beechwood because that's the traditional one, and especially last year I was focusing on the Rauch beer and the Smoky Helles, which call for Beechwood, or at least the Rauch beer does. I have tried some apple and cherry smoked malts, and I think they're a little sweeter and less intensely smoky. Excuse me. And it says so in the description of them when you look at the maltster's web pages about it. And I think that's generally true. I tasted the mesquite malt at NHC, and that stuff is really intense. But yeah, mostly the Beechwood is what I've worked with. And I think that's probably the most appropriate in the German styles. Even in the classic style like the Helles, it's probably going to work the best for you. But I mean, I see no reason why you can't do a smoked Helles with like mesquite or something if that's what you're into.
Fair. I was just curious. Interesting, the sweet and the more mellow. I would have definitely thought the apple and cherry would be stronger, so that could be interesting, like a sweeter style. Have you? I know you bought a sack of the best malts. I'm assuming you used the Weyermann Beechwood. Have you noticed a difference between the two? Like, is one more smoke than the other, or anything like that?
Yeah, so that's a good point. I thought the best malts was a little more intensely smoky than the Weyermann, and a little drier and more like crackery almost. The Weyermann was a little more mellow, but that's just kind of my impression. And I think you could actually smell it, like when I opened the sack of the best malts, it just like the impression of it was just like more intensely smoky.
So we talked a little bit about.
No, I was just going to say the best malts when I first smelled it, it can come off as almost like cigarette smoky, but it didn't taste like that in the finished beer.
So we talked about the shelf stability of the beers themselves. Do you find that the shelf stability of the malts go down based on like their age? Does it lose smokiness or anything like that?
Yeah, so I think the malts do lose smokiness as they age. I'm not sure I know how fast that happens. I mean, probably you're good if it's less than a year old. I would say, yeah, but overall, I don't really know how much or how fast the smokiness of the dry malt deteriorates.
Pretty soon in the future, we're going to start measuring things by the number of COVID-19 cycles.
Yeah, exactly.
Did your beer last one COVID-19 cycle? One quarantine cycle?
I mean, I have bought the smoked beer or smoked malt by the sack, and I mean, I usually go through them within a year, and they all seem to be smoky end products. So to the extent that they do deteriorate, it doesn't seem to be too fast.
Cool, man. This is definitely got some cool stuff out of this, and I'm really interested in. I actually got a smoked Helles I'm going to keg up for lagering soon, so I'm going to take your advice and do it side by side with an IPA, because I've definitely noticed that when you're drinking the smoke, it dies down. It becomes a bit of an issue in competitions when you're, judging yourself or getting your beer judged, because you get blind to it really quick. You're like, this isn't smoky at all. But I've never done like the side by side with like an IPA and noticed the difference. I'm super excited to try that out.
It's really weird. I mean, you'll get accustomed to the smoke, and then you drink an IPA and then go back to the smoked beer, and it's like, how did that happen, right? It's like it just comes out way more.
Yeah, I'm super excited to try that. That sounds awesome.
All right, cool.
All right,
this is
cool.
awesome, Ramsay.
Thanks, Ramsay. Really appreciate it, buddy.
You're
Thank you very
welcome.
much. Yes.
Good stuff.